Today's coaching session is about a fundamental poker truth. A lot of people think their job as a poker player is to do something plus EV. I want to bet because I get protection. I want to bluff because I think I have some fold equity here. I want to rep the 9. People love to put forth reasons for plays as if they're sufficient, but what it really takes to be a good poker player is not to do something plus EV, it's to do the highest EV thing possible. And that often requires a careful comparing and contrasting of 2 lines. In the pocket king's hand that Jess plays today, I take her through a journey on how to figure out whether it's better to raise a flop bet or call that flop bet. One line is far better than the other, and it's this careful, meticulous process of determining which line is best that leads to EV maximization and ultimately success at poker. Before we get into this coaching content, I'm going to tell you about something that may well benefit you, and that is the Easter sale at carrotcorner.com. You can get 25% off site-wide. This went live today. If you're watching this on Friday the 7th of April, of course you guys are. You want to click the video as soon as it drops. It's going to be live all the way through to Tuesday the 11th. That means that the Carrot Poker School, our gigantic cash game course, my blood, sweat and tears, my life's work on poker theory, that is 25% off, so that's a huge saving. And of course Cash Injection, our quick to implement exploit course to crush the competition, to exploit the humans you play against day in, day out. That's also 25% off, along with a few other bits and bobs. Check it all out at carrotcorner.com. Link in the description. Let's get to the coaching. Enjoy. So Jess, you have been battling on the reg tables a little bit more. You've moved away from the rush and cash a little bit this month. How are you finding that, having more reads on your opponents, sort of enhanced sense of dynamism and game flow? How's that been for you?
It's changed things. It's just a different kind of layer of complexity, I suppose, because I'm only playing like 4 tables at once, and you do kind of still manage to pick up a bit more than just in the past. Kind of my kind of light green rec tag is literally just people who aren't sitting with 100 BB, and then I just presume that they're kind of going to be not a great player. But then with rec tables now, I'm actually kind of, I don't know if I sometimes get too fixated on them when I've seen them be an absolute idiot, and just get fixated on that instead of kind of thinking about how I've filtered their range and all of this sort of stuff. I'm just like, wow. So it's an adjustment for sure, but it was fun. I liked playing on them yesterday.
I always find reg tables are like a lot more fun from like a human personal perspective, whereby you can like see how one individual is playing, and like your player type reads are no longer you don't even need like population reads or vague player type reads anymore, because you can sort of like climb the specificity read ladder all the way to the highest granulated read, which is like an actual individual human is doing X, Y, and Z, and I can exploit them. And that's a lot of fun, I think, compared to just like pool like largely overfolds here. Because when I say pool overfolds here, I know that sometimes I'm against a human that overdefends that spot instead, and they're just an outlier, and I have to take the rough with the smooth when it comes to that. But with player type reads in reg tables or individual player reads, you can actually say, I can kind of see into this guy's soul right now, and I'm like really confident that their range is like skewed in X direction.
Yeah, there was like a 60 or 70 BB stack sat on my right on one of the tables yesterday, and after a little while I noticed that he literally was folding to C bets almost constantly. So instead of just kind of like, no matter board texture, anything, I was just range betting 100% of flops and just getting folds constantly.
Cool. So let's get into some hands. We have 8-7 of spades here. We'll see what comes up today. We go for the cold call in this situation, which I think is fine. It's going to be a relatively break-even proposition, but this is the sort of hand you want to flatten the small blind, flop a flush, which is a nice way to start things off. We face a bet, and we go for a call here. Okay, any thoughts on the decision of whether to raise the flop first and foremost?
I think after this hand, I thought I should have check raised the flop, because we can get cold off of like 1 spade hands, like King X with the Queen of Spades or something like that. I think it just kind of builds a pot out of position here that could go even more multi-way with a hand that could really turn quite mediocre on a lot of turns.
Yeah, I mean, if the turn is a spade, I'd actually be kind of glad I hadn't raised the flop. So one thing to point out here is that you're saying your hand can turn mediocre, meaning a 4th spade comes on the turn, right? That's what that means. If that happens and you now have the worst hand, it probably means that you've now just built a bigger pot in which to have the worst hand. So for example, if villain is betting with ace queen with a spade here, they don't fold to your raise ever. And so when you then go to the 4 of spades turn, it's not a good thing that you raise the flop. So we need to make sure we don't get this backwards. The reason we raise the flop is for value, and that's maybe what you mean when you say that your hand turns badly. You maybe miss value on certain turns and runouts against them 2 pairs or sets or things like that. Or even against draws in some sense, like when a draw doesn't get there, you want to get money in against it while it's still a draw and still has a reason to call you. So there's definitely a sense of urgency here on some level. I don't think it's the case that you have to actually raise here in GTO. And what I'd like to do here is actually describe the GTO landscape to you, and you can then maybe tell me what you think is different in the real world, and that could guide us as to what the highest EV play might be on this flop.
Okay.
So in the GTO world, what's going to happen here is that I can only speak for heads up pots because that's what I've actually studied and output in here. I don't know about 4-way pots in this texture, but I'd imagine everything's just tighter and more strict, really. So this range in GTO is going to be fairly polarized, even though it's only a small bet. So it's still going to be like quite polarized, even for the small sizing. Your hand is going to be mostly a call. There might be some raise. It might even be a pure call. And the reason is that in GTO, what happens is when you raise here and build a gigantic pot, like, okay, you raise once, that's totally fine. Like, you put extra money in there. Villain calls and you have an advantage against the range that calls you. Remember, that's the point of value raising, is to have an advantage after you're called in terms of equity. That's all very well. But then what happens on a brick runout when you like bomb the turn and jam the river is that it actually gets quite thin. And although you do get called by some weaker hands, it's like quite a thin value line to take with an 8 high flush to just check raise flop, bomb turn and jam river. Now, the other thing that happens when you just call here in GTO is that because villain has started off by betting quite a polarized range, they're going to end up betting the turn at quite a high frequency. They're going to be bluffing with non-spade hands sometimes, like on the turn. They're going to be bluffing with like queen 10, 10 9, ace 10, etc. They're going to be bluffing with like low pocket pair with spade. They're going to be bluffing with the higher EV draws that you could just raise against on the flop anyway, like the ace of spades, etc. But the point is they're going to apply a lot of pressure with other hands than just a really good flush draw, and they're going to do that at quite a high frequency. Now, that's what makes calling the front runner play here in theory, is that it's not that thick to go for this giant value line, and villain is meant to bluff quite a lot if you just call, so you can make a lot of money that way. What do you think is different to that in reality? How are people's ranges constructed here in the real world, and how do they differ from that description, do you think?
I think maybe real world, like lots more people are just completely range betting flops. Yeah, I think especially for small sizing, people are just, I think, raise pre, C bet flop. So I don't know if it's all that strong.
Some people are range betting. I would say that far fewer people are actually range betting this flop than they would like heads up on some rainbow board or something like that. So I do agree with you that some of them are. I also think they'll just be betting much mergier in general, which is kind of what you're saying. So even if they're not range betting, we might not have to go to that extreme conclusion. We could just say they're betting a king like really often. They're betting pocket aces really often. They're betting all of these hands more often than they should. They're betting the nut spade draw more often than they should, because that hand should really mix in GTO terms. So when villain's range becomes more merged, villain has more mediocre hands and drawing hands in their range. What does that do to our propensity or proclivity to want to raise here, do you think?
Brings it down?
No, it actually brings it up, because you're saying that they have more draws, which you definitely want to raise against for value, right? If you could see that villain had the nut flush draw, you want to raise. And if they have medium hands like 2 pair or something, or top pair plus draw or something, you also want to raise. So the more medium to good hands villain has in their range, the faster you want to play your value hand. And the more polarized villain's range is, that's to say the more really bad hands and then like nutted hands they have, the less you want to raise. So the flip side of this is, if villain's range was like the nut flush or a total airball, raising would be ridiculous for you. Like, why would you ever raise an 8 high flush against that range? So yeah, the more polar they are, the more you need to slow play and not consider value raising thin. And the more merged they are, the more they're value betting too thinly themselves on the flop and bluffing too unselectively and too high frequency, the more we can actually go ahead and raise, particularly where lots of those bluffs have high equity and are actually calling our raise and turn bet really often. So I like the raise here. Based on pool reads, I think in GTO it's a fairly low frequency play actually, and it's usually just a call. But I think raising might well be better in practice, like you say. How does that sound? Any questions on that?
Yeah, that makes sense. Right. I think we're going to see a call here.
Yep. Yeah, I think we saw a call. Okay. And then this gets re-raised, which is a little bit terrifying, I would say. I mean, I have this test for where spots are overbluffed and underbluffed. I'm going to share this with you guys. This is like one of my absolute trade secrets from private coaching. If you hire me for coaching, you'll hear some things that I sort of give students that aren't like common parlance in streams or YouTube videos, and this is one of them. And it's called the overbluffed, underbluffed test. It's like a litmus test for whether a spot is overbluffed or underbluffed, right? So basically, overbluffed spots will have the following three things going on in them. One, villain will reach a spot with lots of candidate air hands. That just means hands that could bluff if they wanted to, that are air. That's number one. Number two, in an overbluffed spot, villain will have quite a small value range. They will not have loads and loads of value combos compared with that air range, usually, although there's some exceptions to number two. And number three is that it's natural and intuitive for human to bluff when holding the candidate bluffs, when holding the air region. So let's go through these one at a time. Number one, is it the case that villain reaches this node? Think carefully here, don't answer too quickly. Reaches this node before he raises, before he or she raises here, do they reach this node with lots of candidate air hands?
Yes.
Good, they do. Question number two, is it fair to say that they have not very many value combos here?
Ooh, I don't know. I can't think.
How would you score it out of 10? Like if I said 10 means, oh, villain's value range is really tiny, like we feel really good that there's hardly any value hands, and 0 being, this is terrible, villain has loads of value bets, where would you put it?
I'd say like a 4.
I agree.
4 or 5.
Yep, something like that. And then number 3, it is intuitive and natural for a human being to bluff here if holding the air region.
No.
Okay. So basically we have a spot where there is lots of air that gets to this node, but there is also quite a lot of value, and the air that gets here really doesn't want to bluff. It's extremely bizarre for air to bluff here. So actually this is going to be what sort of spot?
Quite value heavy.
Yeah, really.
From his range.
Really underbluffed spot. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
unbluffed, sorry.
Right away, it's like, I have close to a bluff catcher in this spot. Like I can't beat any flushes apart from 6-5 and 6-4, 4-5, 5-3. Okay, that's some flushes. So maybe we do have a value beater here, to use the terminology of grade 2, lectures 7 and 8 of the Carrot Poker School. That one's a little bit far off for you, Jess. Where are you in the Carrot Poker School at the moment?
Lecture 5.
Of grade 1, so that's about 13 lectures for you to get through before you get to this point. Aren't you excited to get through 13 more dense lectures of poker theory? How fun.
Yes, definitely. I think it's going to take me ages. I'm going through them slowly to make sure I understand it, but yeah,
you're doing the right thing. You're doing the right thing. So I think here I would already be very concerned that my EV had plummeted as soon as I faced this raise. I would already be in quite a doomsday, wow, this is like barely break even to call here mode. I definitely don't want to jam unless you have player reads. Any player reads on this individual, do you remember?
Not that I can remember, no.
So I guess I would call, because I do think people merge a bit too much here. I do think they're capable of raising like deuces or king jack or a low flush. I think you're a bit too high up to want to fold here, but I don't actually think I want to jam. I think if you jam here, you're committing a polarization error and probably creating a spot where when the money goes in, we do pretty badly actually overall. Villain has quite a lot of bigger flushes, so I like the call. Now we lose to deuces and king jack, so now I would actually check and fold to a big turn bet. That would absolutely be my play, because I was already on the fence on the flop. I was like, God, I don't like this. I probably have enough pot share EV to call, but it's a super underbluffed spot. So now if we face a big turn bet, it's going to be like, well, we lose to most of the merges that we were beating. It's no longer clear that villain will bomb a 5-high flush anymore, although they might. I think this is a clear fold if we face a big bet. We don't face a big bet, we face this really awkward, annoying bet that like, I don't really want to bring myself to fold to it, but maybe I still should. What was your thought process here?
I think it was that exact one. I think I call here and then fold the river, and I think it was because of this size. Yeah. And it's just because of that size where I'm like, that's such an annoying size, because if he bets bigger, I do give up. I definitely give up. I think this is what I was thinking. If you bet small, I'll call. And then he goes and puts in this like under half pot bet where I'm like, oh, this is annoying. So I think, yeah, that was exactly my reasoning for the call. I think it was just not big enough for me to fold.
So the concept that we need to understand here theoretically comes from grade 1 lecture 5 of the Carrot Poker School, and it's called pot share EV. Have you got to that yet?
I'm literally just starting to go through lecture 5 recently, and I've started to kind of understand, the pot share EV a little bit.
Enough to give the audience a killer definition?
No chance.
All right. So I'll do that part. Pot share EV is basically the amount of the pot expressed as a percentage that we need to get back in order to call. That's our required pot share EV. But this doesn't just mean equity, it means chips that we can also make through implied odds or making our opponent fold later in an overfolded spot or something like that. And realizability also matters a lot here, and that you could have a lot more equity than you do pot share EV, and that you just don't realize enough of your equity when you make an investment because you face future investments and have to fold, or you fold the best hand, or you fold a lot of equity, or whatever it may be. So what we can say here is that we require 23% pot share EV to call, and even if we had 23% equity, that wouldn't necessarily mean that we have 23% pot share EV, because we're out of position with a hand that has very bad implied odds. There's like no way we can hit a river card that makes us a good hand here. Either we're barely ahead and surviving, or we're absolutely crushed and have no redraw. That's really the only two options. It's very much a sort of kind of far ahead but very far behind when behind spot. So what I would say here is that in all of these situations where you don't have any implied odds, and it's even going to be difficult to always win when you are ahead, because villain could bet river big with the ace of spades blocker and you could just fold anyway, I'd say that your pot share EV, that's your percentage entitlement to this pot expressed as a percentage of the current pot, even though some of it can come from future streets, we can still express it as a percentage of the current pot. And I would say that it's much less than your equity here. And I would say that you would be lucky to have 23% equity here. The way you would have 23% equity here is if villain is frequently raising a hand like ace-x offsuit with the ace of spades, but then that has to have called multi-way in the first place. A lot of people are not going to peel that in a four-way pot even before the flop. But the weaker somebody is here, the more fishy and mergy they are here, the more likely I am to just like sigh and make this call. I actually think this is a fold already on the turn, even to this sizing, because I think our equity is going to be neither here nor there, like around that 23% target, but we will not realize all of it. Our pot share EV will be lower than our equity due to all of those problems that we mentioned there in grade 1, lecture 5. When you get through more of it, it really goes into loads of examples where pot share EV is higher than equity, and then other examples where pot share EV is actually lower than your equity. So I think you can still make a hero fold in this spot, and I know it's tough to fold a flush and it's fortune reversal and it's not nice to have to do it, but I think this is a really good fold if you make it on the turn. Not sure I would make it in real time, it's tough. And yeah, I've never seen an easier fold in my life. Like, this is insanely boat heavy. Like, if you call here, it's one of those times where...
God, tell me I fold.
Well, if you call and villain doesn't have a boat, it's like, I threatened to eat my passport earlier on stream today if I was wrong about something, and I was wrong about something, so maybe I won't threaten to eat this again, or like promise to eat it, because like not only would I have to go to the hospital probably because it's made of undigestible leather, but I would also have to apply for a new passport, and there's strikes at the passport office at the moment and stuff, so not going to do that. But I would be shocked if this is anything but a boat. Like, I would say it's like extremely underbluffed. Extremely. If you go through the underbluff test here, villain gets here with loads of air. True or false? Completely false, right? Couldn't be more false.
No chance.
Villain gets here with plenty of value combos. Yes. Or not many value combos would be false, right? That's the thing we're looking for it to be an overbluff spot. So that's false. He gets here with loads. And then it's natural to bluff here if they do have a lower showdown value hand. Not at all. So this is the most underbluff spot ever. Yes.
Please fold, yes.
You knew you were going to fold. There's no way you're calling there.
Yeah.
You got to give yourself some credit here, Jess. You're not calling there. No way. No one is calling there that's got like any respect for their bankroll or for their win rate. No one is calling there. This is great. Good. Okay, kings. Open, queen 4-4. I think this is a pure bet. I think you have to bet this hand, and you do, which is good. Villain raises. I think you have to call this hand. I don't think there can be any other play. Interesting.
This could be, yeah, I'm not quite sure. This might be the person I was talking about earlier.
So we have some exploitative stuff going on. Talk to me about this villain then.
Possibly. So I'd seen him he was definitely a beluga, like he was turning up in weird spots with random hands. I'm not sure if this is the exact one, but I did stack off with 2 pair against him and he turned a straight. And I think, yeah, I was having some, like this is what I was saying about reg tables being just a little bit different and something I have to think differently about and like learn how to play them. Because in the spot where I did stack off with the 2 pair, without a doubt, I think on rush games, I'd have just folded that to like the random green rec. But because I'd seen this guy doing some egregious stuff, I think I was like, cool, because he could definitely turn up with 1 pair here sometimes. So I don't know if in this spot is against him. I can't think.
Okay. let's say this is against him. Would it help if I showed the screen name? Would that help jog your memory?
Nah, because it's going to be that weird GG thing.
Oh, he's not called Ed. He's just called, he's got a player code as his name. His name probably isn't Ed. Let's call him Ed anyway, because Ed's a fine enough name for a random fish. Okay, so this is Ed. Let's talk about it theoretically first. So I was very adamant that you shouldn't 3-bet this flop before I saw what you did. Why, in theory, would this be a mistake?
Well, because the only hands that call are ones that beat us a lot of the time.
And you can make that claim even stronger, and you can say Villain's raising range to your flop c-bet is so infested with 4x or bluffs that it makes no sense to re-raise a medium strength hand. You now have a medium strength hand.
Yeah, because he's in the small blind as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, okay, that makes me a bit more okay with your play. I'm still not okay with the play for a reason I'm going to get to in a minute, but it makes me a little bit more okay with it because in the small blind, he should have way less 4x and way more queen x in this range. I think the weaker players are raising a lot of top pair here, and I do think this player probably has mostly top pair and not a 4, but they will have a 4 sometimes. But in GTO, if this is like against big blind, the raising range against the hijack c-bet is going to be mostly 4x and bluffs. So first off, can we agree that if this is more polarized and Villain is either 4x or bluffs, it makes like very little sense to 3-bet with kings. We would call, happily, bluff catching, having loads of EV, maybe even beating a few queen x value raises like ace queen, but we wouldn't have high enough equity to 3-bet and get our money in here in this manner.
No.
So if you want to get your money in with kings here, you want to do it by calling and at least not filtering Villain to the point where their bluffs go away and their value hands continue. If this board was wetter and Villain could have high EV bluffs or high equity bluffs, it makes a lot of sense to build a 3-bet range. So when you c-bet small on like 8-4-3 two-tone and the big blind raises you, you can absolutely 3-bet kings in GTO because you can get paid off by loads of 8x and stuff that's raising the flop, and flush draws. There's just loads of mergy hands that can pay you off there, and it's not too thin. When Villain is as polar as the GTO raising range is here, it's not a thing. But I will say that I think your real life opponent in the small blind in this pool has far more queen x than they do 4x. I think that's kind of obvious. So therefore your raise is less bad, but it's still the wrong play. Why?
Because if he's got queen x, then we're beating him. We're not. He could also fold with like a bad kind of queen. Maybe we're just folding out hands that we beat sometimes.
I mean, he may call the 3-bet with queen x too. Like he may pay you off. This is a value 3-bet. You're obviously trying to get value here. So
yeah,
if you 3-bet the flop and Villain has a queen, they may. It's not that we know they're going to fold or anything like that. They're going to pay you off a lot. But why is that not important? That's not actually important at all.
I think I'm lost it.
All right. Well, let's say I've got two. No, not at all. Let's say I've got 2 mugs of coffee, and I'm going to give you. I'm like, would you like a coffee, Jess? And you're like, yes. What do you take in your coffee?
Milk and sugar.
Milk and sugar. So I put milk and sugar in both cups of coffee, and I say, Jess, you should have this cup of coffee because this one has milk and sugar in it. What's wrong with my logic? I've put that in both of them. Yeah. So I'm like forcing you to take one of them by explaining something about that mug of coffee that's also true of the other mug of coffee. And it's not that like you're going to object. You're not going to be like, no, Pete, I want that mug. You're going to take the one I'm giving you, but you're going to think I'm an irrational weirdo for saying that, right? You're going to very quickly reach the conclusion that I am thinking irrationally here. Poker players think like that all the time. They just don't know because they're not as versed in poker as we are in life. So when you say, I'm going to raise because he can have a queen a lot and a queen will pay me off, I'm like, so what? There's milk and sugar in the other line as well. If you call, you can value bet the turn and river. What's the urgency? You're in position. You're not comparing lines. And if you don't compare lines, you don't find out which line is the best. To be a really strong poker player, you've got to not just stop at looking at one line, but look at the counterpart line as well. Because if something you like about one line also exists on the other one, that's not a reason to prefer the first one to the other one. Now, what's the EV loss of raising here? In which part of the game tree does raising cause a big problem?
The part where he has a 4, the part where
Stop a second. The part where he has a 4 is bad on both. You've got to look at the other line. If you call, also going to lose a lot of money. That's not the part where it matters. Where does it matter?
Where he has complete air.
Excellent. That's what matters. The other stuff is all true, but it's not relevant. They're not deciphering variables. They're just random variables. What we're learning here is that there's a big difference in poker between a variable that is unique to one branch, that's something that really matters, it's a discerning variable, and then another variable which is just a constant variable across everything, and that doesn't matter. It's like if you're shown two pictures and one is a picture of an orange tree and the other one is a picture of an apple tree, and you say, I like this one because it's a picture of a tree, that doesn't actually help me understand why you like that picture. If you like oranges more than apples, though, that does help me because that's a discerning variable. So this is kind of the logical framework that we're dealing with here. So call is much better than 3-bet, not just because this could be too thin, or that's the case that villain has a 4 a lot, nothing to do with that, but that you don't actually gain anything against villain's overall range by raising, but you do by calling, and that's why call is better than raise here. But you have to compare both lines. You have to zoom out and say, let me look at this one, let me look at this one, weigh them up. This is a skill that you have not practiced much because your thought process, no one has ever shown you how to do that, I don't think.
Right.
And because of that, you don't have that mechanism down yet. But now that we're giving you the skill, I really think you can go off and force yourself to do that, and you will build that muscle, it will become stronger, and then you'll be able to discern what the highest EV play is everywhere. Well, not everywhere, because then you'd be an end boss at poker, but like in lots of places.
One day.
So there you get the fold. It's like, well, what did villain fold? Probably like Jack 10. Is that a good thing that villain folded a hand that was drawing 10?
Yeah, exactly.
Not only is it not a good thing, it's a horrific thing. So this is a blunder, but you can see how you did it. You did it because you vaguely reacted to some player type and didn't compare your two options in EV. Okay, I'm fine with check here, especially at this SBR. When we leave villain's range really wide, what's villain's range like when they bet, usually?
Still wide. It's still got all of the wide stuff in it that didn't go away on flop.
Yeah, it's kind of like this really unselective, sprawling, like this is a sloth range. I know that you like sloths, but I don't actually mean this in like a positive way, even though I know are they like your favorite animal or one of your favorite animals?
Absolute favorite animal. I've booked my next tattoo in.
You're going to get a sloth tattoo.
Sloth playing poker.
That's so good. We need to get the AI. I know you already said this to me, but we need to get the AI on that case stat. What is it about sloths?
I just love them. They just look so happy and chill. And like, whenever you see them, they just look quite cool. Like they've got no problems in the world.
Guys, favorite animal in the chat, smash the like button. What do you think about sloths? Let's please the algorithm here. So this is a sloth range in the bad sense of the word, in the sense of like a person that sits on the sofa eating Doritos all day as a sloth, like more in that sense of the word than the cute, lovely animal that's just programmed to sit there on trees chilling out. Humans aren't actually programmed to sit and eat Doritos all day. When you realize that the amount of Doritos on your hoodie is enough to make a whole 30-gram bag of new Doritos, that's an issue. And this bet comes from that sort of person. This bet is like, nah. This bet is like changing the channel when an advert comes on when you've been watching TV for 4 hours. That's the level of thought that goes into this bet. So we should call. And we should be very happy. Again, we shouldn't raise because we have a mediocre to strong hand, but not enough equity to raise. And we want to just allow villain to do all the sloth stuff that villain is doing. I'm ruining sloths for you. I'll find a different analogy. The couch potato stuff that villain is doing. Call is great. 8 on the river. Check. Grade 1 Lecture 2 is all about value betting. In Grade 1 Lecture 2 of the Carrot Poker School, available on carrotcorner.com, we talk about value betting thresholds and corresponding bet sizes. How much equity do we need to think we have here to make a B75 on this river? Do you remember?
We need to think we have quite a bit of equity. Mm-hmm. I can't think of the exact number, but like, I'd say like 50 to 60%.
That's
maybe?
Not quite a bit of equity. 50 to 60% is, I'm kind of ahead right now slightly, but if I bet, I will be a big dog to the calling range. That's what 50 to 60% means. It means after you bet, you're dead. Because if you only start with 56% equity, you don't survive after they continue to your bet. So quite a bit of equity in this spot, and this is key that this comes up because I am going to shake all of the polarization errors out of your game. I'm determined to do it, and the way I'm going to do that is by reminding you constantly that to bet big for value specifically, you need like 75% equity, something like that. You have that here, no problem. You have 75% equity here all day because villain has done basically nothing to suggest that they have a tight or compacted range. So we should bet this river. If we don't, it's a mistake, and we can bet big because we do have a lot of equity here. This check is losing a lot of money because we've actually got here with the best hand 80% of the time or something, and we're likely against a merge range that can pay us off very easily. So the key to this hand is actually the action sequence we've got here in such a way that villain's range is so weak. We've left it weak and wide on the flop here. On the turn, they've made a tiny bet, not indicative of a lot of strength. Could be a king. when they check the river. Very likely a hand that's capped at like Queen X or worse. It could be a king. Sometimes you will check back here. Villain will have a king and you'll be like, oh, I'm a genius. I checked the river. I didn't lose another bet. But overall, if you have 80% equity here, you've got to value bet. So what went wrong here in game? Did you hand read inaccurately? Did you forget the value bet thresholds? How would you sort of coach your past self here?
I think it was about forgetting the value bet thresholds maybe, and just not remembering kind of the flow of the hand, like not remembering how we got to this branch. And like you said, the route we took down here was keeping his range very wide. So like we've just got a great hand here, sure.
Yep. I think this chronological awareness or chronological consistency, shall we say, where we like really follow the action all the way through, not explicitly, not in like the 2009 way where people would be like, villain's range is all of these combos. Now that we check the flop, his range is these combos. It was like, you need to go and sit in a dark room until you've calmed down, my friend. That is not how you think about ranges. You need to chill. That's what I'd say to those students. Stop putting people on exact ranges. We don't have to do that. But what we can say is villain's range is wide, it's weak, it's merged, it's capped. We can use all of these terms, right, that really help us get to that conclusion without having to be combo boffins. That's all we have to do. A general awareness, like when you go to the shop to buy milk for your coffee, you are aware that you have come from your house to the shop, but you aren't going, I have now gone 4 degrees north and 16 degrees west. You're not doing that, but you are aware of the general trajectory of the action. And here you need to be aware of how you got to the river. Same thing.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of coffee today, speaking of coffee, so my analogies are a bit wild. It happens.
And here, I think I remember this hand because I thought straight away, like, he calls a bet on the river. We did miss value.
Don't like it as an analysis. Sorry, I'm just beating the shit out of you today horribly because I'm in this like brutal mood. I really apologize. I don't mean to. But when you get to the spot, Jess, what matters is that you lost EV against the range. It doesn't matter what they had this time. It's not evidence of anything. He could have shown up with King Jack and you would have said, oh, well, I made a good check. No,
yeah,
you didn't.
I suppose it's the opposite to that, isn't it?
You're right.
To be bothered about the things that have happened rather than kind of what hasn't.
We need to be bothered about the stuff we could control. Exactly. You can't be bothered about the stuff you can't control. So whether the player shows up with Queen 6 or King Jack or whatever hand, that's not really important. What matters is that we put them on a range that's generally accurate and we act as if they have that range. And when you check this river, you've acted as if villain's range is way stronger than it actually is. Yes, the Queen 6 would have called, probably, but we don't care about that. We just know that when we have 80% equity in game theory, we must bet for value. And that there's nothing exploitative here that overrides that. That's why theory is so important. Once we have that down, we can't really go wrong here. However, one thing I will say in your defense is, if you thought you had 60% equity, great check. 60% equity is a check, and that's what we're working on, right? Because we're stopping you from betting the middle of your range and spots. So that part is great. Maybe you just misjudged how good your hand was because you forgot the action sequence, and you can see how this happens. It's very easily done. Right, King Jack. Raise. Call. Queen 7-3. Bet's good. Call. So this turn spot, to bluff or not to bluff, is the question. What is the key Carrot Poker School concept that we should start with, or before we even look at our hand, before we even get into that bluffing decision, but when we're thinking about how selectively to bluff, do you remember the name of that weird overarching concept that we should think about?
No.
That's because it's in a grade you haven't done yet. It's actually in grade 2, I just realised, so that's not really a fair question.
That's like, I got to think of this.
The term is world favorability, which you've probably heard me like spewing on about.
Yeah, I've heard you mention it on streams and stuff.
Yeah, I talk about it a lot. So the idea is this: when you're in a world that's favourable for your range, so that means that when your range actually owns more of the pot in EV, has more pot share EV than your opponent's range, and by quite a decent margin, you do not need to be selective about what you bluff from the point of view of redraw. So the better your range is doing in a spot, the more inherent fold equity is present, and the less redraw you need the times you're behind to bluff. Okay? So if you were in a really unfavourable world, like the flop came down 6-5-4, and you're out of position as the small blind raiser, for you to even make a defensible c-bet bluff there, you need to have immediate draws, right? You need to have some kind of equity. But in a world like this, where your range is actually doing okay, because you're in position, and you have a big nut advantage, so your range is doing okay here overall, you don't need to be that selective about what you bluff. So this means that you don't need to like worry about whether you have a flush draw. Of course you can bluff with a flush draw, You can bluff with Jack 10 or 10-9 or 5-6, but you don't need a flush draw Jack 10, 5-6, etc., 10-9 to bet here. You can also bet with hands like King Jack because they have blockers to top pair, they have unblockers to lower pairs, they have live pair outs against villain's lower pairs. If villain has a 7, you can still bank a king or a jack. But more importantly, the fold equity in theory here is just decent for you because your range is in a favourable world. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, definitely.
So when you're considering bluffing, I don't want you to worry straight away about what your hand is. I want you to ask, how's my range doing here? Because if your range is doing really well and you have position, you can probably bluff any hand whatsoever within reason, like almost anything. So I think you can definitely bet this hand on the turn. I thought you wouldn't, which is why I went into that spiel. I wonder if you're being too selective in a world that's actually quite favourable for your range. It's not that you have to bluff, but you can, and I want you to know that you can.
Yeah, I'd imagine so, definitely, because if that eats the 8 of clubs, then I'd definitely fire again. That would have been then focusing on my actual hand rather than my range, which, yeah, still makes this a bet because of it.
It's not a bet, it's just it's okay to bet. Theory doesn't say that you have to bet. It's just that you can bet. Remember, bluffs are can bluff, must bluff, can't bluff, right? These are the main criteria. So it's hard to get that balance right between hand thinking and range thinking, because equally you're not ignoring your hand either. You're actually saying, what are the requirements placed upon me by the situation, and can I bet this hand in that environment? And here the answer is the environment is quite friendly, it's quite hospitable to your range, therefore you can bluff unselectively. But if you bet with 9s here, that's really bad, because now you're making a polarization error, so you do still need to look at your hand. It's just that you don't need redraw to bluff in favourable worlds, but you do need to make sure you don't have too much showdown value, which here you don't. So there's some selectivity, but it's around a lack of showdown value rather than the redraw side of things. So you can definitely bluff here. So today, what we've really done is we've worked on the theory of your game. This small pot here, it's fine to play it the way you played it. There were no mistakes here from an EV perspective, but nevertheless, we need to think about these concepts because they really guide us towards understanding how to play a good strategy. And I hope what we've done today is we've actually gone through these spots in quite a theoretically heavy way, because the gaps in your theory, once you fix those, they can make a huge difference. I really think so.
Yeah, definitely.
Hopefully I've not been too critical. I just felt like a lot of the spots that came up were really good examples of some of the things you need to fix.
Yeah, I don't really care about criticism anyway. I'll take everything on board.
Well, then in that case, you're shit.
Well, I know that's not true.
Yeah, I mean, I think with criticism, as long as you know, like, when it's coming from a place of like someone really trying to help you, like how can you take that badly? But when it's coming from a place of someone trying to hurt you, it's a very different thing. And there are both in the world, you come across both. So Jess, having just been bombarded with all of that for the last 40 minutes, if your brain isn't as fried as mine, can you summarize some of the things that we're going to be working on this week?
Yeah, in spots like this, kind of thinking more about our range as well as our hand for picking up pots. Also thinking a bit about bluff catching and putting those I'll have to find the free rules or the free steps, but kind of trying to remember them, pick it up after this video goes out and pick off bluffs that way. Also kind of thinking about our equity on rivers with the Queen's hand where we lost a bit. And that was a clear kind of, we had a bit more equity than we thought. We had a bit more. So yeah, just trying to perfect that a little bit. And that's all I can think of, it's off the top of my head. Yep.
I would just add that maybe the comparison of one line to the other. So when you were thinking about like 3-betting that flop in position against the fish, you made one argument for 3-betting the flop, which was that their range was like too wide and they were spewy or whatever, but we didn't actually get to the point of like, well, what's the best line to actually capitalize on that? Like looking at the advantages of one line and then asking, are those also present in the other line? And which are the discerning variables that are only present in one line? Because those are the ones that can show us where one line is better than the other. But I agree, this has been a bombardment of poker theory and knowledge, and it's the kind of session that we have crammed into one YouTube video, and you do have to go back and watch this again. Maybe even some of the audience will want to go back and rewatch this one. Maybe I had too much caffeine today and I've just spewed a ton of stuff like in a short space of time.
Yeah, I think that's kind of, it's going hand in hand with me going slowly through the Carrot Poker School stuff. It's also trying to rewatch these videos and really, really take on board everything and like work on, because then, Carrot Poker School is generic theory that's like applicable to everybody, but I've also got to concentrate on the things that you're picking up that's specific to my game. Yeah, and just trying to like change lots at once. I feel whenever I'm sitting down at the table, I think there's so much that I'm thinking about now I didn't think about before.
I think as well, like when you first came here, arrived on my doorstep, ready for your coaching package to begin, man, there's so much stuff that you've learned that would have been so much better if you'd never learned. If you'd like never played poker before, in some ways, not always at all, there's some things you do well, but in some ways it would have been way easier to coach you because you wouldn't have had this ingrained monologue that's not particularly theoretical or exploitative. It's very results oriented. So your natural way of thinking about poker, Jess, is extremely results oriented, and it's kind of neither here nor there between theory and exploits. But I know when I teach you theory and I teach you exploits, they both make perfect sense to you. The problem is you're not putting that into a clean hard drive. You're actually having to overwrite all these other programs and uninstall all these other programs, and that's what makes this so difficult and cumbersome. And I think it's probably true of lots of people watching this as well. You're not alone in that endeavor. I was saying this the other day when I was on Charlie's stream. I think he asked me, like, what do I think about streamers that, aren't like top professionals, but they're streaming? And the idea is that they're fine for entertainment, but when their thought process becomes other people's thought processes who are trying to seriously learn the game, it's a big problem. And I'm sure you watched a lot of learn-entertainment poker, a lot of like not so serious educational poker stuff for entertainment before you got serious about the game, and it has made it harder. It really has.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. 100%. I've got a lot to uninstall for sure.
Yep. And that's fine. We'll get there. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So guys, if you like the way we coach, you can check out my rates on carrotcorner.com, as well as the Carrot Poker School, the course that Jess is making her way slowly and carefully through. We'll be back here for more content very soon, and do stay tuned for a premium YouTube service that's coming up here at Carrot Corner Poker Education, where we're going to have special elite video series available for channel subscribers. Do let me know what you think about that idea. I'm excited for it. Let me know what you think about this content. Smash the like button, help us grow. We'll see you back here for the next episode of From Stalling to Mauling. Bye for now, guys.
See ya.